real talk, a shocking number of business owners are behind on their books and their accounting all the time. And this is even true in financially minded fields like real estate investing. I have seen it across all industries with every business owner, entrepreneur that I speak to. And I get it, right? We all know that we should be caught up on our accounting, but it's not going to bring us more money to have our books up to date. And so we don't, right? Not a single business owner that I've spoken to has been up to date on their accounting unless they pay someone to do it for them. And what's even worse is that people are often so behind that they're catching up at the beginning of the next year in order to finish it for their taxes. And then, of course, it just keeps rolling and compounding, because if you're doing last year's books at the beginning of this year, you're not doing this year's books. And so you're just constantly behind. And while updating our books doesn't necessarily bring us more money, right? It's not an income generating activity. The truth is that it's very difficult for us to do business planning and financial planning if we don't have an accurate, up-to-date snapshot of where our business finances are. And so it is an important thing to do, and yet I get it. I will be honest, before I had a virtual assistant do my books, I was never up to date either. So I get it. And so that's why I wanted to share the solution that I used, which was having a virtual assistant help with my bookkeeping and accounting. And I'm going to dive into how specifically I did it. If you decide that having a virtual assistant help you with your books and accounting is something that would be a win, please reach out and schedule a discovery call. The details are in the caption below. I'd love to learn more about your business and see how we can help. All right, so first, since we're dealing with finances, sometimes people can be worried about security and confidentiality. And so I wanted to share what's in place to help protect you. QuickBooks and other accounting programs are already set up where somebody can have a different login than yours that only allows them to see the results of your transactions. They do not access your bank accounts directly. They are not able to transact anything. They are not able to touch your money at all. They are purely in the accounting system, which is just getting reports that are pulled from your various different accounts. Second, one thing that sets Workergenix apart from other virtual assistant options is that you're hiring a US-based company, and we have things like cyber insurance in place on the off chance that something was to happen with any of your financial data, which, remember, all they can access is your data, not your money. We've never had anything happen, and yet if it did, there is insurance in place, versus if you hire direct or you use a placement agency that finds somebody but then you're hiring them direct, there's none of those securities in place. Finally, we only work with Filipino VAs, and in Filipino culture, there's a very high power distance, which means they respect employers. And in this culture, stealing or breaking the confidence of an employer is very much frowned upon. So that is one of the many reasons we love working with Filipino VAs. So now that we've kind of addressed the security aspect, let's talk about what a virtual assistant can do for bookkeeping and accounting. If you don't have a ton of transactions, which a lot of people who come to us, that's a situation. They want somebody to do bookkeeping, but it's not a full-time job. First off, we have part-time or full-time options. But second, how I started, because I didn't have a ton of transactions either, was my executive assistant, who did multiple things for me, did the bookkeeping as part of her role. So that is definitely something that you can do if you don't have enough transactions to be its own job in and of itself. That is easy. Now, if you do run a business with more transactions where it will be more complex and take more time, then you'll want a virtual assistant who specializes in accounting, and often a VA will have a QuickBooks certification or other accounting experience or certification in place. We can get assistants who have accounting degrees and things like that. So if it is the bulk of your business, we can certainly get somebody who is a good fit for that. And where this decision is made is in that initial discovery call, where you really outline your vision of what you want the virtual assistant to do. And with our knowledge of virtual assistants, we can say, hey, yes, this is a great fit, these kinds of roles, this is what tends to be out there, and make it so it's a win-win. So next, let's talk about hours and availability. All our virtual assistants work US business hours, so you can reach your virtual assistant via messaging, chat, or on the phone or with video calls during the day while you're working. If you select part-time, they'll either work the morning or the afternoon shift with you, which is either 8 to noon or 1 to 5 in a US time zone. If you select full-time, you can really set whatever hours you want. Again, our clients typically do prefer US business hours, but if you have a full-time virtual assistant, you can set whatever hours work best for you. Next, how do you train your virtual assistant to do the accounting? Well, first, often they already know the accounting part, right? Especially if this is a key task for you, we're going to have somebody who already knows QuickBooks or whatever system you're using, and they understand the basics of accounting. So all you need to train them on is the specifics of your transactions, because if there's a transaction from Acme Supply Company, they're not going to know how to categorize that unless you tell them. And that's where you're going to have to do some training and some implementation. I've handled this a few different ways. One thing I did when I first handed off bookkeeping to a virtual assistant was I did a video. I love using either the Zoom personal meeting room where you can just share your screen and record, or Loom as well is another great option. And I went through my accounting past transactions and I highlighted, hey, this company, Acme Supply Company, it's a place I go a lot. We get office supplies from there. Typically that's categorized as office supplies. This business from XYZ company, that's rare. Don't worry about that. We're not going to go there again. This kind of transaction, Delta, that's always work travel, or things like that. So I liked to do a video and say, hey, here are our most common transactions and here how they typically are categorized. I didn't have to remember because, again, we're not accountants, because I was in the accounting software. I had it pulled up on the screen that I was sharing, and so I could see, hey, this is how we categorize it, and I know that these are our standard transactions or commonly, frequently done transactions. Then the virtual assistant was able to take that video and make a procedure about doing the accounting. And in that procedure, they made a table. Hey, if this is the place of business, this is how it tends to be categorized. And that helped because that was a resource that, again, can go back to again and again and again, and we get consistency from that. Another strategy that I've used is on the receipt itself. And I like this a lot as well. I will write down before I take a photo of it for them, I'll write down what it was. So when I have the receipts and, once or twice a week, I would go through my wallet and I would get any receipts that I had and I'd write on, this was for a meal with a client, or this was office supplies, or this was travel meals, or whatever it was. And I'd write it on the receipt itself prior to taking a photo of it and getting it to the virtual assistant. I liked that because then it's recorded forever. It's not just something that's a standard rule. It's something I can always look at that receipt and see what it is. Now, a little bit of an aside, let's talk about how you get those receipts to the virtual assistant, because if you don't have a virtual assistant, you're taking the time, maybe on your phone, to go into QuickBooks or whatever system you use, categorize the transaction, and attach the receipt there. That's a lot of busy work, and we're going to get that to where you're spending a fraction of the time. What I like to do, if I had a paper receipt, I'd take a photo, and then I would upload them all to an online drive where the virtual assistant had access. I use Google Drive. Obviously, there's other options available. What I liked about that is one of the other tasks I gave to the virtual assistant is we kept all those receipts in that drive and they renamed them with the date of the transaction and the amount of the transaction. So then in addition to having the receipts attached to the transactions in QuickBooks, which the virtual assistant does when they're categorizing them, I also have folders that contain all the receipts. That way, if I ever cancel my QuickBooks account or anything like that, I still have all these receipts. And if I ever need to reference back to them or anything like that, they're easy to use because they've all been properly named and they're in my shared drive. Also, thinking of security, guys, when you use things like Google Drive, you're giving access to an account. And if you're ever to part ways with that virtual assistant, it's very easy in Google Drive to remove that person's access from the account. And when you give them access, you can give them different kinds of access where they can see things, where they can edit things, where they can download things, or where they can not. So I would point out that all these drives and other things are made for security, and so you don't have to come up with all these security things yourself. You can use tools that are already secure for sharing information. And so that was how we got them the receipt so they could do the accounting, which is categorizing and processing transactions, right? The transactions come in from the credit cards or the banks, and then they're saying, here's what kind of transaction it was, here's who it was with, and here's the receipt that was for it, right? So what other tasking did we have this accounting virtual assistant do? What does the tasking look like? So in a project management portal, I would have a recurring weekly task to process the transactions that came in for that week. If you have a business where you are billing people, you could also have a recurring daily or weekly task where they process all that billing, right? That is something we see so often. I mean, we'll have somebody come out and work on our house, a landscaper, a handyman, and we're not getting billed until months later. That's something that's totally solvable and where a virtual assistant can help with that. But they can do that and you just make a weekly task where you have a system in place and they do it every week, every day, whatever interval works for you. Another task that I had a virtual assistant do is because once they started doing my accounting, it was all up, my finances were up to date. So I had a task where the virtual assistant would complete a spreadsheet of my financial KPIs or key performance indicators. And then once a week during my business planning and review time, I could access that spreadsheet and know exactly where my business was and what my profitability looked like without having to do any work to prepare it. If I had made that spreadsheet myself, I mean, I'd have to process all my transactions and then I'd have to put all the details into the spreadsheet. It would have probably taken me roughly an hour a week on average. Instead, it was done for me. And then I was able to do that high level business ownership role of looking at those finances and seeing where I stood, right? What money I had outgoing, what money I had incoming, and where my net income was so far. So that was super, super helpful. And then another task I had a virtual assistant do was monthly reconciliation with the bank statements and the credit card statements. So that is one thing where I went in because they didn't have access to the bank account or the credit card account themselves. I would pull the statements, save them in that shared drive, and then they would go through and use that to reconcile the accounting. So these are just some of the ways that a virtual assistant could help you with bookkeeping and accounting so that you are always up to date. You know the numbers of your company and everything is better recorded, right? You have all your receipts in one place, you have your receipts attached to those transactions on QuickBooks, and you are then just doing the high level task of double checking, reviewing, and understanding where you are financially to advise you as to where you want to go. If this would be helpful for your business, again, schedule a discovery call. The details are in the link below. Workergenix would love to meet with you and see how we could help get a virtual assistant to help you with bookkeeping and accounting.